Welcome to DiEM25's Another Now, the program that owes its existence to a mindless virus that placed capitalism in suspended animation, something not even the Second World War managed to do. The 1-hour discussion program every Monday night here in Europe night. Together with a weird and wonderful guest, we rant and rave with one ambition common in our souls: to prevent a return to normality once the pandemic passes. Now, of course, it's normal to crave, to long for a return to normality, but it would be, would it not, an inexcusable waste not to use the lockdown to envision an altogether different now, another now, a now worth fighting for once we're out there again. Just like the Great Wars, so do the Black Death, the Spanish flu, coronavirus now, all pandemics. It is as if they have turned a mirror to our faces and forced humanity to rethink its ways. Now, there's no doubt that the powers that be will do their utmost to force us back to business as usual. Are we going like sheep to return to the dystopia passing for normality? No questions asked? Or are we going to seize the moment, ready to imagine another now, and indeed to fight for it? Tonight here in Europe, I have the overwhelming honor and joy to be joined by Roger Waters. Yes, girls and boys, friends and foes, the Roger Waters, who tells me he's isolated in New York City. And since, let me surprise many of you, he speaks Greek. Roger, καλό μεσημέρι από την Αίγυπτο, καλό βράδυ από εμάς εδώ στην Ευρώπη, στην Ελλάδα. Πώς είσαι, πώς περνάς τη χώρα του Donald Trump?
Well, I'm not going to waste my breath on Donald Trump. Είμαι καλά, ευχαριστώ πολύ. And I'm not in New York City. Like a lot of other people, I've made the exodus from the city. And so I'm in a very beautiful place out in the Hamptons. I am isolated, just Camila, my missus, and I are kind of alone in a house and sort of spending our lives like you do when you're isolated. It's extraordinary how different, even if you're living in the lap of luxury like I am, and I completely admit it, what a huge change it is for there to be no soccer to watch 3 times a week, or whatever it might be in your life. You know, I was talking to a friend in England today who said, isn't it strange? He's actually Scottish, so he speaks like that. And he said, isn't it strange? He said, I take the dog out in the morning for a wee while, and then the missus takes it out in the afternoon for its second walk. And apart from that, we don't do anything. And he says, I haven't used the car for 6 weeks, you know, and which really is a bizarre thing. I saw a thing in People's Dispatch the other day. I don't know if you follow People's Dispatch. It's one of those sort of, you know, news blogs, but it's from all over the world. And it's a way for people with left-wing views to keep in touch with one another internationally, along with Vijay Prasad's Continental thing and a few of those other great things, how we get information. And somebody, either in Delhi or Mumbai, I don't remember exactly, had taken a photo from his balcony, and it's the Himalayas. Yeah. And he says underneath, I've lived in this apartment for 40 years. This is the first time I've ever seen the Himalayas. So just stopping all the traffic in Mumbai or Delhi or wherever for however long it's been, suddenly you can see the Himalayas, which is quite bizarre.
Well, can I just butt in to say that last time we were together, we were in London.
Yeah.
In demonstration against Julian's extradition. Now we are in lockdown to save our skin.
Yeah.
I think we both feel the duty to remember the man who has been placed in solitary, not to save him, but to murder him. Yeah. And also the fact that, you know, speaking from a left-wing perspective, there are thousands out there, hordes of laborers working so that you and I can be in our luxurious surroundings to isolate ourselves.
Yeah. Well, trust me, the two names that are on my lips internally in my head every day are Julian Assange and Vanessa Berretzer, who is the appalling magistrate who is keeping him locked up in Belmarsh, even though that in itself might be the death sentence that she and the lackeys of the grocer's machine, as I call it, are looking for. They want Julian Assange dead because he's a proper journalist who tells us the truth, even if it might be about war crimes that the powers that be would rather see covered up. And so it's an absolute disgrace. And you and I know, could rant and rave at one another for an hour easily, just about that one small microcosm of how malign the powers that be and the governments who represent the powers that be are, and the way that they're running the world and how dangerous it is. And that is maybe one, in your introduction, you know, which I've just listened to, yeah, are we going to be able to get anything positive out of this pandemic? Will our isolation allow us the opportunity to think a little bit more clearly? And also maybe to recognize our predicament more clearly than we did before. My predicament was largely intellectual, although it's emotional and political as well, because I actually care about other human beings. I have a reservoir of empathy which drives many of my actions. But imagine being there on the breadline, which is where most people in the world are. The huge majority of people in the world live on the breadline. They live from one grain of rice to the next.
Exactly.
And
on
so
the brink, constantly on the brink.
Constantly on the brink, you know. People often say to me, how do you explain in North America, where you live, the fact that that the poor people, the working classes, the disadvantaged, which is everyone except Bezos and fucking Zuckerberg, don't rise up and say, no, we can't live like that. And I have come to accept the view, which is this: they are so oppressed and so engaged with the awful situation of having to make $5 turn into $7 just to get to the end of the month, that they haven't got the energy to rebel. They haven't got the energy to rebel. Somehow, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that this has always been the case. One of my favorite quotations comes from a French aristocrat of the 18th century, Marquis de Condorcet, who said that...
Condorcet? He's in my opera. I talk about Condorcet in my opera.
Yeah, remember, he says that the key to understanding successful oppression lies not in the guns of the oppressor, but in the mind of the oppressed. And the beauty of what we are experiencing now, I mean, the one thing that I get, not satisfaction, but a modicum of hope from the current lockdown, is that, you know, people have actually seen what politics is about. Because up until the lockdown, the media portrayed it as a kind of football match or league where, you know, it was which team was scoring points, winning the championship, the government, you know, more members of parliament and so on. But now you can see that it is all about, as Lenin used to say, politics is about who does what to whom. You know, the government can decide we stay in, we go out. These trillions, you know, they can give it to their friends, they can give it to poor people. Suddenly we can see naked power and the extreme nastiness of it, which the Julian Assange case portrays very. But we can see there's a chance that people will see through those layers of obfuscation and alienation that stop them from realizing who the real oppressors are. Yeah,
wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But, you know, the fact of the matter is, though, and this is, you know, this is what am I beginning to learn more about here? I sit here in isolation. I never turn on the TV because I couldn't be less interested in anything that I can find there, with the possible exception of occasionally going to RT or Al Jazeera if I want a bit of general international news. But the fact is that the propaganda war, which is the most important war of all, grinds on, and it doesn't stop. The bombardment hasn't stopped for a single second. In consequence, the person who I wouldn't waste breath on when you asked me the original question, what I think about Trump, the question is being answered to some extent by polls with the American people. So we are told, if we're to believe the polls that filter through, that people approve of the way he's handling the coronavirus pandemic. And his approval ratings haven't gone down. If anything, they've popped upwards. So the fact that he lies through his teeth constantly, that he makes all the wrong decisions, always, every single day, about everything, including this virus, affects people not at all. The fact that he is a product of reality TV and has this cheap veneer of showmanship about him is enough to persuade the people that he's a leader. Notwithstanding the fact that he has no education of any kind, he's dumb as shit, he knows nothing about anything.
I thought you were going to waste your breath on Donald Trump.
Sorry, there you go.
No, but I think we should speak about it, because look, my view is that the vast majority of people who support Donald Trump don't do it because they think that he's telling the truth, or that he's competent, or that he's good for them. I think they've given up on politics. Look at the previous administration, Obama. Obama was a complete catastrophe. He's the reason for Donald Trump. He took the architects of the 2008 collapse, people like Tim Geithner and Larry Summers, and put them back into power to refloat and re-empower Wall Street. So the fake news and the fake policies have been happening before that. In my estimation, most people think, okay, whom should I vote for to piss off the establishment? And the answer is, if this fool over there, I'll vote for them. I don't think that the majority of those who vote for Trump actually believe in Trump.
Well, you may well be right. Maybe they don't. I saw a lady on a documentary I was watching about the only day of the year in a small town in West Virginia where anybody can get health treatment of any kind. One Saturday a year, people drive there days before and sleep in their cars because they can get free dental treatment for one day of the year in this town. And there was a lady with no teeth, probably about 30 years old, looks about 60, saying what was it she was saying? That she had voted for Trump, and that he had promised that he was going to save the coal industry and that he was going to bring jobs back to the working classes in America. And she's going, I'm beginning to believe that maybe he didn't mean it. And you go, whoa, what a breakthrough. But of course it isn't a breakthrough, because we know that it's absolutely central to the whole system that is extant, not just in the United States of America, but by and large, all over the world, okay, that rich white people figured out how they could colonize the rest of the world, and they did, and now they're going to screw everybody in it as hard as they can until we're all dead. And that's basically the system. And occasionally you get a blip in this, and actually the blips are becoming much, much bigger, which is a great thing. And the blip is Bolivia and Venezuela and Mexico, and occasionally you get what they call a pink revolution, where the teachings of Simon Bolivar rise to the surface, or Lenin or Marx or whoever it might be, who says, don't you think we should share this shit out a bit more fairly? Notwithstanding what the Roman Catholic Church might say, or whoever else is the instrument of power. And so I'm at least encouraged. I'm encouraged by Venezuela and Bolivia, and Ecuador when it was Correal, not obviously now that it's this Lenin Moreno fascist person. So
it's not really good for us, Roger, is it though? Because I was speaking to Rafael Correa 2 days ago.
Yeah.
The news from Ecuador is just abysmal. The way that fantastic revolution by a hugely democratic effort by Korea was totally usurped by his vice president, effectively, by his number two. And Venezuela, I have to tell you that even though I'm just completely and utterly opposed to the embargo of the United States on it, the fact that it is still a military regime, it's not like Ecuador. Ecuador under Rafael Correa was far more progressive. I don't like to see the military taking power because, power can be very abused, and as it is in Venezuela. I can't support the regime in what they do, even though, I would oppose the attempts by the United States to throttle the people of Venezuela and to stop them from making a choice for themselves. They just want to push them back.
Well, all right. But we're not going to waste our time on this program having an argument about Nicolas Maduro or the current, political situation in Venezuela, unless that's what you want to do.
But I don't want to do that. I want to go back to the United States. We were talking about Trump. I mean, we're just dusting ourselves off. The complete success of the establishment in imposing Biden as the nominee of the Democrats and snuffing out the Bernie Sanders revolution. The only man who could beat Trump has been defeated by his own party yet again, because his own party doesn't care about anything other than making sure that the power.
Right. I know. Yanis, I couldn't agree with you more about the two-headed snake theory of American politics. This is not even a two-party system; it's a one-party system, and they've sort of divided. They've given the snake two heads, and they call one Democrat and one Republican, but they both absolutely 100% support the system. They support capitalism. They support Wall Street. They support all of this bullshit that's going on. For instance, now with this
fight against the healthcare system. Both of them are united. They're both united against having a national health service in the United States.
Yeah, of course they are.
In the time of coronavirus.
Listen, I had a conversation by email last night with a friend of mine. His name is Greg Galeazzi, and he's just finishing his third year, or has finished his third year at Harvard Med School. This wouldn't be a story of any sort, really, except he's a friend of mine. But he also hasn't got any legs, and he's only got one arm. And so he was in either Afghanistan or Iraq. I honestly can't remember, Greg, and I apologize for not remembering the details. And an IED goes off, and suddenly he's got no legs and blah, blah. And he's completing med school. Do you know what he's doing now? Because they're in lockdown and they can't, they're going through their ethics classes as part of their medical. And I couldn't resist starting a conversation going, wow, Greg, that's interesting to be talking about ethics in an American med school. And about it is interesting. I would be fascinated to see what it's about, because he is now trying to reconcile within himself all his thoughts and feelings, because this is, can you imagine how strong you are to go through Harvard Med School? So he's now having to think all of that through. How can you reconcile the idea of the providing of health care to a nation of people with the fact that it's only for profit, only? That's what they're trying to impose now on the National Health Service in England, is a completely profit-based thing. This is the whole idea of the Friedman School, of Chicago, whatever economic. This is the whole neoliberalist nightmare foisted on us by Reagan and Thatcher and Blair. Let us not forget that the labor movement was joined into this happily, and Blair is still a happy perpetrator of the death that it foists on the whole population of the globe. They're trying to kill the whole planet as fast as they can. And so, what do we do? Well, we make as much noise as we can, but how do we actually create the mass movement You know, the left, we, and I would include here, you know, my friend David North, the Socialist Party in the United States of America, they're actually really bad at selling their product. If it is a product, it's not a product, it's a political philosophy. And it's one to which I absolutely subscribe. I believe in socialism. Socialism is a dirty word where I live in America, but it's not a dirty idea. It's the only idea that can, in my view, that can find a way through the darkness of the world that we live in to the possible light at the possible end of a possible tunnel that might allow our children and our grandchildren to live.
Yeah, you just remind me of what Rosa Luxemburg once said, you know, it's socialism or barbarism. Unfortunately, those who spoke in the name of socialism proved quite barbaric as well, because, you know,
Stalinism. So it's the old argument.
Even the Labour Party, you know, the Trades Unions Council in Britain, you can see that a great deal of authoritarianism rises up within our own ranks. That's why, you know, I have a very soft spot for the anarchists in Spain, the anarcho-syndicalists during the Spanish Civil War, who had the black and red in their flag, the red to signify revolution, and the black, the darkness in the soul of each one of us that we must always beware because it can rise up and put us in our own gulags, as it has happened so many times. But look, you mentioned Thatcher, and I don't know why should you know that, but I moved to England as a 18-year-old in 1978, and I left in 1988, so I had the whole thrust of Thatcherism. But allow me to ask you a personal question, if I may, about Thatcher, and a political one, nothing to do with Pink Floyd or your family life. But it seems to me, just judging by your work, that the post-war consensus that you grew up in, the post-war dream, right, made you personally, as Roger Waters, feel deeply alienated. And yet, when Maggie Thatcher came and shattered that post-war dream, that post-war consensus, effectively replacing that desperation that was part and parcel of English life before 1978, 79, and she replaced it with, you know, the cacophony of money-making, the boisterous peeves, the City of London. Yeah, suddenly you seem to miss the dream that was alienating you, but that she destroyed. Am I completely wrong here?
I'm not sure I understand you. Missed the dream? No, I never missed the dream. We never let go of the dream of the idea that we might discover a more ecumenical and a fairer world and a world where we human beings cooperate one with another, and in consequence provide ourselves with a future, because the current model is unsustainable and unworkable. Even any economist will say you cannot go on expanding, which is the neoliberal idea, is that if you go on expanding and expanding and expanding and produce, it can only be done by printing money. Well, I shouldn't be preaching to you because you're the economist in the room. You know, you maybe understand this shit a lot better than I do. Margaret Thatcher was, you know, she was a product of the times and the time. What happened in the 70s and the 80s and so on was that we started to come up against some of the harsh realities of the divisions that were always there and that survived the revolution after the Second World War. There was something of a revolution after the Second World War in England with the creation of the welfare state and so on and so forth. But, you know, little bit by little bit, the propaganda started to take over, and they managed to sell this idea that cooperating with one another in a social way and acting as a civilized society was not the way for their lives to get better, the way for their lives to all get better, so they could afford more McDonald's and reruns of Bonanza. I assume that's what people wanted, I don't know, was actually to hand over the reins of power to venture capitalists, aggressive venture capitalists, and that's, you know, give the world a golden gecko and suddenly the cake will expand to the extent that even the crumbs will feel like we're living in luxury. It was the idea.
Yeah, look, maybe I shouldn't have used the word dream, but there was a post-war consensus in the 60s up until 1976, 1978, the winter of discontent.
Yeah.
That consensus was one of a mixed economy, free education, even at university level, the welfare state. And yet, from the way I approach your work, that was a consensus that was quite oppressive and alienating for you. You seemed to be alienated within it. It was not, you missed it when Thatcher, for reasons that we can go on, political and economic reasons, we can go on and on about. But nevertheless, she just did that. She replaced it with what you are talking about, a situation where you can't even imagine that anyone can do something for nothing. You know, everybody had an angle. Nobody was taken seriously unless they had money or managed to use other people's money in order to get on. But maybe I'm completely wrong. You know, looking at your lyrics, at your work, at your music, there was an alienation that you seem to feel with what preceded Thatcher.
Mm. Well, you know, we're only individual human beings. I'm only who I am, and I don't react well to errant authority.
Right.
I do not react well to seeing really stupid people doing really stupid things that cause real fucking pain to my brothers and sisters all over the world. So I will always respond to that. Now, it may be that maybe if the dream had continued and it was now even more egalitarian, even had a better health service, that the gap between the rich and poor had narrowed in England, and that we'd suddenly turned into a cross between Sweden and Denmark, and, you know, and Bolivia, I might still find things to rail against. I might still want to rail against some kind of authority. For instance, I would find myself then fighting against political correctness, probably, you know, or people who say, oh, I don't know, you have to really be careful of the language that you use because you might hurt people's feelings, or all that fucking bullshit that drives me crazy as well. But, you know, that is a cross that I would far rather bear than the cross that I do bear, which is seeing the human race of which I'm a part being killed faster rather than slower. You know, I was struck when I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago or something, and we were talking about Mary Corsipende, and you were talking about this program and about how when Noam Chomsky was on it, there were a million views of whatever. Well, I was one of them, obviously, because I watch everything that Noam Chomsky has to say about everything, because obviously he's a brilliant man. But what's interesting about him, one of the things interesting is it doesn't matter how far you go back. Nuclear war, climate change. He almost stops there. He'll go on to talk about freedom of the press and this and that and the other, but basically says those two things are killing us faster than anything else is. And that the fact that those of us who think about things and who care about things and who are attached to the idea that there might be a future for the human race, that we cannot persuade the rest of them. We understand about the oligarchs and the plutocrats and the what. They make money out of nuclear weapons. They make money out of the fossil fuel industry. They make money out of big oil, and they won't let any of that go. If they can make a profit out of it, they want it. They love war. War is the most profitable thing. War is what saved the economy of the United States after the Second World War, and the economy of Europe, if you like. With all the infusions of money in order to control Europe after it, the Marshall Plan and all that stuff. So that Chomsky goes, well, that's all very well, but you are committing suicide. You are. That's what you do. And I think he's right. I don't think he's wrong about that. So
no,
obviously our job, part of our job is to keep going back to those two Chomsky primary things. I saw a thing on one of it. Sorry, I was about to say one more thing, which he said this thing. He was at Davos a few years ago. He wasn't at Davos. He wouldn't go to Davos, but he read something, and it was this, that they listed the 18 most dangerous things at Davos, the CEOs, the 300 odd CEOs at Davos. What are the 18 most dangerous things facing the world today? Climate change and nuclear war weren't in the 18. They didn't make the 18. What was number one? Regulation.
Yeah, minimum wages. They really think that that is going to destroy the world.
Anyway, I'm banging on. How do we arrive at a place where, how do we arrive somewhere where we can make even a small amount of progress, even a nuclear arms reduction deal, even that, which you would think would be anybody with an IQ above room temperature has got to go, we've got to do that tomorrow morning. Maybe Bernie would have done that. Maybe if Bernie was president, possibly, just possibly, of the United States, which he's not going to be, because as you rightly point out, he's been railroaded by the DNC for the second time in a row. The only viable candidate, in my opinion, who might have made any impression upon the Trump voting base at all, has been wiped off it because he doesn't represent the plutocracy that is the United States. Biden obviously does. Biden's perfect. You know, he's got the false teeth and he has horrible ideas about everything. So he's perfect. And he cares desperately about protecting the people with the money. What?
Biden has no policies. He's simply the depository of all the policies of the status quo that simply wants to reproduce itself by means of a slightly more civilized version of what the Republicans are doing. But look, it's very easy to lose heart, because we realize that every time that there was a glimmer of home, it was snuffed out, whether it was Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders. 2015, our government, for 5 months, Roger, the establishment in Europe, not just in Greece, felt they were losing control, and they went to pieces. They were panicking, I can tell you. But of course, they managed to turn it all around. They have the media and so on. So what do we do about this? Two things that I think we need to try. Of course, these are just very broad ideas for the time being. But firstly, we have to take a leaf out of the bankers and the fascists, because the bankers and the fascists understand one thing, that concentrating on political...
Bankers, did you say?
Bankers, the financiers. The financiers...
Yes.
Yeah, they both share one great insight, that the only way to succeed is through internationalism. They internationalize. They are amazingly solidaristic with one another. So if you look at Bolsonaro and Trump, Matteo Salvini, Orban, Nigel Farage, they're mates. They operate like an internazionale, right? The same thing with financiers. Financiers know no borders. They have absolutely no capacity even to discriminate between German bankers and French bankers and Japanese bankers. They always succeed in forcing governments in moments of financial distress to refloat their banks with public money. They are very good at that. So I think we need to do that. What we've been doing as part of DiEM25, Merit 25, with the Progressive International that I set up with Bernie Sanders about a year and a half ago. And now we're trying to bring it out after the terrible end of the primaries. With Katrín Jakobsdóttir, who is the wonderful Prime Minister of Iceland. We need to internationalize. We need to create a progressive international movement that has one agenda for the world, that then finds its specializations in different parts of the world. The nation-state based policies of the UK Labour Party that operates as if there's no world outside Britain. The Greek Communist Party that it's frozen in time and in space. The same thing about, you know, the German Social Democrats. For them, the rest of the world just doesn't exist. We need to internationalize. That's one thing. And the second thing, okay, if you talked about the corrosive power of money and why, you know, we are all committing suicide like a stupid virus that kills too many of its hosts, the planet and society. What is the kernel of that, you know, virus of capitalism, of profit maximization? In my view, you know, I'm pushing 60. I'm 60 this year. I'm just beginning to recover my radical socialist youth beliefs. I think it has to do with shareholding. The one market which is the beginning of all this toxicity is the share market. And come to think of it, we've accepted this as a given, that, you know, there's a corporation, lots of people working in it, none of them own it. The people who own it, we don't even know who they are. There are other corporations and shell corporations and so on. Now, how about coming up with a very radical idea? You know, we can have markets and so on, and we can have shares. But let's say that, imagine shares being like library cards in universities. You join the university as a student, you get a library card. You have one. If you don't join the university, you can't have one. You can't sell it, you can't buy it. It gives you one vote, let's say, in the corporation. So you leave the company, you take it with you, you have a share in another company where you go to. Now, that to me is a mental experiment by which to start imagining a world in which money cannot become toxic.
In which money cannot what?
Cannot become toxic. It cannot gather sufficient power to mobilize humanity's resources in ways that destroy humanity.
Okay, no, yeah, of course, brilliant, great. Hang on. I'm just going to concentrate. Done. You know, I used to go to the co-op to buy fucking potatoes when I was a kid. You know, I remember the idea of ownership of the company by the customer and or by the workers. These are
TSB.
What?
The Trustee Savings Bank. Do you remember the TSB Bank in Britain?
Yeah.
Do you remember that it used to belong to anyone who had a bank account there?
Yeah.
You remember what Thatcher did with it?
What?
You remember what Thatcher did with the TSB?
No, I don't remember. Remind me what she did.
Only Thatcher could imagine that. She wanted to privatize it.
Yeah.
But of course, it didn't belong to the state. So the state could not sell it.
Right.
So what she did was she nationalized it in order to privatize it. Now, if we cannot be cunning like that, but in reverse, then we're done.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot in what you say, and I know, because I know you, you know, I know the work that you've been doing, and I know some of the ideas, because we haven't known each other for very long, but I know some of the ideas that you have going forward, and I watched your conversation with Brian Eno and whatever, so I know your 3-point plan for Europe and blah, 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 and all the rest of it, and it all sounds good. But you're right, you know, so what you're suggesting to me is that if we were to cooperate with one internationally, then we would be in a stronger position. But also, we have to sell this. We have to become such good salesmen that we can persuade people that there is something better than snake oil that actually works, like it's called healthcare. You know, and to persuade the rest of our brothers and sisters all over the world that snake oil is not the answer. Now, clearly, we all live in communities where, now I nearly got careful then, because I was nearly saying, we've all been subsisting on snake oil for it's a couple of thousand years at least, you know. It's interesting that at least part of the Christian church is called Roman Catholicism. As you and I know, Catholo means universal or overall. So the Catholic Church has two things about it. One is that it's the Romans, you know, who were relinquishing power, you know, albeit very, very, without much enthusiasm for the idea of power sharing. So that was one thing. but that they wanted to somehow maintain a universal influence over everybody and whatever. So, and I'm not suggesting, yeah, I am. I'm suggesting that religion, in a general sense, is a kind of snake oil, and it's something that we've sold ourselves, or it has been sold to us by the kings who were given a little bit of an opportunity by God to see if they could run things. That's what feudalism was, you know, that's what monarchies were about. It's God saying, this chap looks a bloody good leader of people. Let's call him the king, and he can have power given to him by me, God, and he can disseminate it however he wants. And that, you know, and that's feudalism. And it's sort of now, it's the idea is that, well, these Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and the neocons and they look like, let's give them all the power and see what they do. Well, what they're doing is they're killing everyone. They're only starting with the poor. They're going to kill everyone, but they're killing the poor happily just to make a few quid.
That's right. That's right.
And they do it happily. So we have to somehow sell the idea that there is more joy in helping people, in loving one another, than there is in hurting them and killing them to make a few shillings. So how do we sell that idea?
Speaking of salesmen, I mean, our movement with Bernie Sanders, with the rest, you know, we are going to put together very soon a manifesto for the world. Effectively a socialist, progressive, but very liberal in the original meaning of the word liberal manifesto as well. But speaking of salesmen, I mean, I can't imagine a better salesman than Roger Waters. Now, would you like to share with us what the ideas that we had for this summer, if you can still go through it, or maybe if not this summer, later on, about this this tour you were going to do of the United States that you would combine with texts on rewriting the constitution of our democracies. Do I remember correctly that you were saying to that effect?
That was an idea I shared with you a few months ago about the idea of, because part of my idea, this is not a drill, the tour will be called when we go on the road, because I am determined to go on the road, and obviously it won't be this year, because nothing is, you can't, it's impossible. What does I want to say? Yeah, I think as I explained, that this is not a drill, will be part rock and roll show, part cinema, because we have a monolith as part of the set. We're doing the show in the round, and it's a giant thing, but it's a lot of LED screens. It's sort of in the shape of the crucifix, but it's three-dimensional. So it can turn from being a huge building into whatever. But then also there's an idea in it, which is that it looks at a three-layer society. There's a thing that I call the iCloud, but it just could be called. So there's in the sky, the ruling classes live in a sort of weird white floaty construct of my imagination, and they rule everything from there. So that's where Zuckerberg lives and does all his stuff, and everything's white and lovely, and they probably have lovely families and whatever. Underneath them, in what I call the netherworld, but it's actually the real world, the rest of us all live in fucking misery. You know, we don't, because I'm not in misery at the moment, but we are crushed. It's the oppressed state that most people live in, that thing of never having more than 20 bucks in your pocket, desperately wondering what you're going to do at the end of the month. You know, if you're black in America, wondering when they're going to come and put you in prison to work for them for nothing, which is sort of the 13th Amendment. That's like, let's keep slavery going forever. All this bullshit. In the Southern world, okay, where they have their proxies, the Modis and people and Zucatas who have taken over from the colonists, the colonialists. They weren't settlers necessarily, they were just the imperialists who raped those countries for a couple of 100 years. Now they've got proxies to do it with them and for them over. So all of that. So the netherworld is pretty grim in my view. And then I invented something else, which is the bar. And it's a bar. And it is a dream, I believe, dreamt by the people who are in it, and it's where we talk to one another, where we exchange ideas, where we do sort of what we're doing now, but where we express our love for one another as well. So it is. It's like the little song that I wrote for the end of the wall. All alone or in twos, the ones who really love you walk up and down outside the wall. Some hand in hand, some gather together in bands. The bleeding hearts and the artists make their stand. And when they've given you their all, some stagger and fall. After all, it's not easy, banging your heart against some mad bugger's wall. Well, the bar is where we try to figure out how to make the banging of our hearts against the mad bugger's wall productive, which is why I'm speaking about sales, why I'm using the salesman analogy. I've actually just finished writing a song that's not in the show called The Bar to express a few more of my views. And 2 nights ago, I came up with a line in it that I really like, trying to explain the predicament of those of us who are in the bar and how bad we feel and how frustrated we feel at what we want to do. And one of the things was saying that our disquiet is partly caused by sanctioning the old lady who lives down the road.
That's
okay,
beautiful.
because sanctions obviously are huge, and in fact, in the next verse of the thing, the old lady comes into the bar and we invite her into the bar and we say, come in, sit down, this bar never closes. There's always a place for you here. There is room for everyone in the bar. We're all brothers and sisters and we will look after you. We will not sanction you. I mean, the couplet before her being sanctioned is, we're uncomfortable because we're required to drop napalm on the neighbor's kids. So the idea of perpetual warfare being something that's going on in our neighborhood, I think is a really important one. So maybe I'm a salesman to the extent that I can make that connection and put it in a fucking song and sing it. And because it's, when you think about it like that, and people I know will go, what are you talking about? We don't drop napalm on the neighbors' kids. Yeah, you do. These are our neighbors. Just because they're in Vietnam doesn't mean they're not our neighbors. You know, just because it's Venezuela, it doesn't mean it's not the little old lady who lives down the road. That old woman who you are killing in Venezuela or wherever else you're, or in Iran or wherever else sanctions are being applied, is just as much your neighbor as your grandmother is. These are your neighbors.
We all live downstream these days.
Well, what?
We all live downstream.
Yeah.
All receive all the crap that goes into the river, and you know,
yeah,
it's also all of us. Look, the reason why I still am a Marxist in my old age is because of many reasons, but you just reminded me of one piece of text in Capital.
You are in your early middle age. Don't fucking talk to me about
whatever. In which Marx has a moment when he feels for the capitalist.
Oh.
He does, because he says, look, think about it. We live in a world, in a system, where if he does not exploit the shit out of the worker, he will go bankrupt, because all the other capitalists will. And then what happens? He becomes like his own workers. So what he does is he sells his soul every day to capital, to accumulate it, not for himself, but for capital's sake, so that, a bit like the Matrix. So, you know, in the end, we become enslaved by the machinery that we've created. So in the end, this is the beauty of, for me, of the epic poetry and the lyricism of Marx, that he depicts humanity, capitalist workers.
Totally get it. It's
that
what
you need to sell the idea that there is an alternative to this system called capitalism.
Right.
Even if we haven't found it yet.
You know, Chomsky makes the same point about these CEOs of, you know, he says the CEO of Exxon, who shall remain nameless because I've no idea who it is. You know, if it was Chevron, I could tell you it's Mike Wirth because it's, you know, it's carved into my heart. And so anyway, yeah, Chomsky says, you know, these guys have to live a completely schizophrenic life because, or maybe they do, because it may be that in private, how can somebody who's clever enough to rise to be the CEO of Exxon not understand climate change, particularly is working for a company who did who spent millions and millions and millions on research to find out if it was real and discovered that it was, and then took the decision not to tell anyone about that because it was bad for business. If that guy comes out and says, when he's at Davos, what's your biggest fear? Climate change. He's fired immediately, gone. Somebody else can do that job. So it's exactly the same thing you're saying about Marx being sorry for them.
We are, we're running a little bit out of time. I'm quite happy to stay a bit longer if you want, but maybe we should stick to this.
I'm isolated.
Format. We have lots of questions from our audience, and allow me to just read some of them. You don't have to answer them, but just give them, to pay them their dues. There's one question about a certain reaction by fans in Brazil. How did you feel to realize the rising right-wing populism, even in your audience? Another question from Marco, that was from Bruno. From Marco, will you bring the new tour to Europe, not just keep it in America? And will you go to Copenhagen? That's what he wants. A Greek guy, Yorgos, assuming that today's music has taken a hit regarding quality, especially of lyrics, but at the same time, our times are as challenging as ever. Why isn't there a new radical wave to express our struggles through music? Alexander, what do you think of the Labour Party in Britain these days? Okay, that's a whole program. Claudia asked me to ask you, do you feel that the title of your album, Amused to Death, is coming true these days? What do you think of universal basic income from Gerdur? There's so many. I'll just finish off with the last one, which of course we have more or less touched upon, but not in the particular manner in which Angela has framed it. How can we build a global network of solidarity in this world of social distancing? I want concrete actions to unite people from you, Roger. There.
Well,
you don't have to continue that, but
but the last one, Angela, to answer Angela's thing, we're doing it now, you and I, and I'm sure, and it may well be, if Angela has an iPhone or a computer, she probably does it. She probably does it every day. And what we do know is that there's traffic on social media is beyond our imagination, how much it is, how many exchanges of information there are. Unfortunately, 99.9999999 recurring % of them are entirely vacuous and have nothing to do with the people's struggle against the plutocracies. So, but if we could somehow use, at least take over, maybe even 10% of the traffic on social media and devote it to the potential that we have for creating joy in one another by helping one another, then that would be huge. That would be a bubble that would burst in seconds when things go viral. Unfortunately, as we see from the numbers of things, when people streaming music, for instance, there were questions in there about music that is popular, things that go viral and that people stream a lot is, I shouldn't mention names, but I'm going to. There's a bloke called Drake. I only need to mention his name because I've never heard of him a couple of years ago. And I looked to see what people stream. And I saw that there was a song that had a billion streams or something like that, And I thought, wow, that's unbelievable. So I checked it out. It was entirely without merit of any kind. It was totally vacuous. It wasn't musically clever or anything. And it's by this Canadian guy, and I thought, that's the answer. That's what people want, is vacuity. That's what most of the exchange on social media is about, oh, have you seen a picture of the meal I'm just eating? No, I haven't, and I don't want to. If we could all remind ourselves that nobody gives a fuck what we're eating, but there are things that we care about. Yeah. But sadly, I guess, the things that you and I have been talking about today don't have any easy answers. There is no, I mean, I look forward to reading your manifesto if you and Bernie figure something out. I look forward to it, but the selling of it to people who might vote, assuming that we're going to try and keep democratic system, assuming we like the idea that people are allowed to vote, and that we're no more interested in a benevolent dictatorship than Bolsonaro is in a crazed, terrifying, manic dictatorship. So I don't know. These are all interesting questions. The new Labour Party, I've no idea.
Yeah, it's not good news, I'm afraid.
I didn't like the look of him. And also he immediately sucked up to the Zionists in the first sentence that he spoke as the new leader, which is a big worry, because their downfall, in my view, was to cave to the Zionists. Was a huge part of the downfall of the Labour Party, in my view, because they showed they had no backbone.
There were two. There was that, and there was, of course, caving into the hard Remainers in the Brexit debate. But let's not get into that, because I want to say something to Angela that refers to you, that concerns you as well. She asked the question, how do we build international solidarity? And I'll give her an example involving you, Roger, because some time ago, you sent an email to a cooperative collective near Thessaloniki.
Yeah.
Let me give you some news about that. You too,
yeah, good, please.
So, Angela, listen to this. I received this email from Roger regarding a factory near Thessaloniki that went bust in 2012. The owner, the capitalist, effectively took a loan and just fled to Switzerland somewhere, and he let the place close down. It went into a receivership. The workers occupied the factory, and they've been working it since 2012, and profitably, proving that the place was not bust, just that the capitalist didn't want to be a capitalist anymore. He just wanted to be a rentier. And now, where does Roger come into this? He contacted them to give them support and CC'd the message to me. And I contacted them immediately. And unfortunately, with this very right-wing government that we now have, they are trying to shut them down out of pure nastiness, because, this company is already closed. What is the point of destroying the livelihood of people who've taken over a failed company, a failed factory? And you know what they make? They make
eco-friendly detergent and soap,
friendly detergent
and stuff,
and hand gels, hand washing gels in the time of coronavirus. You know what happened 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, they switched off the electricity. And I contacted the Minister of Energy, and I gave him a scolding, because, being a leader of a party, I have the right, I have this kind of access. And he promised me that within 2 weeks, the electricity will be back. So the struggle continues. Okay, so think about it. A band of workers, Angela, in Thessaloniki are struggling to maintain their livelihood. And here you have Roger contacting me to contact the minister to lend them some support. Whether we'll succeed or not, it doesn't matter. But this is an example of what we can do. And we have to keep doing this. It's heart-wrenching work. It is very stifling, because usually we fail. Okay, it kills our soul, my soul. But on the other hand, giving up would kill my soul even more effectively. So we need to keep doing this, Angela, and you have to join us and use your iPhone or Samsung or Android phone, as Roger said, in order to spread the word and to do the sales work that we want. Roger.
Yes, Ergates, tis viome.
Bravo, Roger. Before we go, let me announce who's next on Monday, the 27th. It's Stephanie Kelton, the economics advisor of Bernie Sanders, a friend and colleague economist. We're going to be talking about money, and we're going to be talking about class, and we're going to talk about revolution, and not taking the standard narrative about money as an impediment to progressive movements. We will finish in Greek. Roger, σε ευχαριστώ από την καρδιά μου. Όλοι εδώ στην Ελλάδα σε αγαπάμε και θέλουμε να έρθεις γρήγορα. Και από το Μέρα 25 και από τη DiEM, από τους εργάτες. Carpe diem, προχωράμε. Thank you.
Ωραία, και εγώ ευχαριστώ πολύ. Adiós σας.
Γεια σου, Roger.
Hey, man.